Hello, everybody, and welcome to another adventure in history. I hope everybody is doing well. For some reason, my chair is just not working the right way today, and I'm a little, I don't know, I'm not seated well. I hope everybody's doing all right. For some reason, it is not showing my chat, which is garbage. Let me turn that on. Hey, look, it's the chat. It's people. Hey, KP. Hey, Figment. Welcome back to the land of the states. Hey, Shiggy. Adventure Prairie Dog. Hey, Techman. I'm alive. I hope your trip back was well. I hope that you enjoyed the episodes and mostly done with jet lag. That's even better. Yeah. I don't know if a prairie dog emote exists. I am sure that in the wide world of Twitch, that someone somewhere has a prairie dog emote. I'm not certain why one would have a prairie dog emote, but I am sure that somewhere such a thing does in fact exist. Best I can do is a meerkat. Oh, good times. Best I can do is $5. Oh, man. So today's actually been a pretty good day. I had some really good classes today. I had some good conversation in classes today. Some real actual learning happened. And it always gets me excited when real actual learning happens. That is sort of like that moment as a teacher where you just get really, really excited about something and you can tell that the students are there with you and the gears are turning, and yeah, it's like teacher cocaine. You just get addicted to it. So yeah, it was a good day for the teaching. Unfortunately, like physically, I'm actually quite tired. Don't let him fool you. He had an existential crisis for a good 10-15 minutes earlier. I do have to admit, this is heavy stuff that we're going to talk about tonight. And I recognize that it is heavy stuff. And yeah, I take this stuff pretty seriously when it comes to trying to stand in the middle and be impartial. So this one has given me some pause, and I'm not going to lie about it. Also, thanks, KP, for calling me out and making me deal with reality. I appreciate that. Seeing the info click for a student is a wild moment. Indeed. You thought sniffing markers was a teacher cocaine? I actually don't care for the smell of expo markers. I don't use a whiteboard at all. I think that they just they always end up looking dirty, and you can't ever really get them clean again, and inevitably somebody's going to write on it with a permanent marker, and it's just like it's messy. And I usually just pull up a blank Word document when I teach, and I'll type notes on there as we go. You use scented markers. Ooh! Well, somebody's buying stuff with federal dollars. But the brown one is a solid nope. Is it supposed to smell like chocolate and it really just smells like armpit? That's usually the way that it goes. Also, hey, Martes. Good to see you, my friend. How are you? Yes. Who wouldn't on this topic? You'd have a full proper meltdown. Figment. I don't think you'd have a meltdown. You'd probably just be uncomfortable like I am right now. The brown ones are cinnamon and they smell pretty okay. Hey, they've changed away from armpit chocolate, so that's positive. Things have changed in the last several years of marker making. I guess people understood that the chocolate scent was not actually pleasant. If you hate whiteboards because of permanent markers, just wait until you find those pull-down things for projectors. Yeah, so I actually have one of those pull-down things for projectors, and I use it every day. I know that makes me sort of backwards, that I'm not hip to the new jive and such, but I still use my overhead projector. I'm a weird guy. what is happening to the world of markers? They're leveling up. Yeah, I know. It's like they listen to their clientele, and they're like, hey, maybe we should do something a little bit different. That's maybe that's something that we could attest and take take measure of. All right, so we are here on a viewer request night, and we are here covering the history of the modern state of Israel. And when I first got the idea that doing the history of the modern state of Israel would be a good idea for a topic, I thought that I could maybe do this in two parts. I could do up to the creation of the state, and then I could do from the creation of the state to the modern day. And it would be like a two-part sort of duology. I was wrong on that. And let me explain why I was wrong. So, in all of the words here, all of the episodes that I do, I really do try my darndest to be factually based, to recognize where bias exists, and to try to present things as unbiased as possible, right? So I do that just period, across the board, regardless of what I'm talking about. That is why the opinion hat exists, to literally designate when I'm talking my opinion. Otherwise, I am trying to do my darndest to just talk facts. I do try to spend a lot of time getting prepared for these episodes and making sure that what's going on is provable, and then I'm not on some weird limb where I'm just making stuff up. So when I started working on the preparation, definitely over the virtual class or hybrid class. One note, yeah, I don't like hybrid classes or virtual classes either. Unfortunately, with COVID right now, it's what we have, so I'm trying to do the best that I can. Facts were so last decade. Yeah, well, I don't think so. And when I started working on the outline in preparation for what I thought was going to be History of Israel Part 2, that covered from basically 1949 all the way up to modern day, what I figured out was it's impossible for me to do that the way that I approach this material in what is essentially an hour and a half to 2 hour long segment. Because there are a few things that we have to sort of put down as foundational base level facts. And we mentioned these when we were doing History of Israel Part 1, and I think we made it through that one really well. I think that we got through that one by saying what happened, being honest about both sides, pointing out where there was conflict. Once Israel does become a country, things happen very, very rapidly. And when we are looking at things from a two-sided perspective or from a multilateral perspective, one of the things that we have to do is make sure that we are reporting all sides of the issue, right? And because things happen so rapidly in the development of the country of Israel, we can't necessarily skip things. Normally, when I prep for a discussion, I sort of sit down in my head and I type just a brief outline of what I know already. Because, and I'm not trying to say this to be like a show-off, but what I know off the top of my head is probably the high points that I want to make sure that I hit when I'm doing a discussion. And it might be a fairly limited bullet point list to a certain extent, but if we're talking about Roman stuff, it might be pretty complicated. And then I have to shovel things off that I, don't really need to talk about. And we skip stuff, right? Because I don't try to teach this like some sort of graduate level master's seminar. I try to teach this around the 200 college level, right? And you can't skip stuff in the history of Israel. If we're trying to set this up and we're trying to actually understand the way that it is right now, the situation is such that the things happening now are very much a line of dominoes that started falling way, way back in time. And if we're to cover this in a way that we actually get the full cause and effect and we understand both sides of things, I can't pull too many dominoes out, because if I do, it's going to leave gaps in things, and we're going to end up causing potential misunderstanding and miscommunication. So the history of Israel part 2 is not up till modern day. It's really not even 20 years worth of history, because so much stuff happens. We're basically going to cover basically David Ben-Gurion's prime ministerships. And that runs from about 1948 until 1963. And what that means is there is potential for more future episodes in the history of Israel. And I do want to impress to everybody that I am doing my absolute best to try to present both sides of the argument and all sides of the argument. And if I say something that seems fishy, you're welcome to ask. I'll explain my reasoning behind it. As always, we can have differing opinions. We don't necessarily have to agree on the interpretation of things. But I will say that I have done an extensive amount of preparation on this, and the facts are the facts. So even if we do have differing opinions on the motivations or people's ideology behind the things, they did actually happen this way, right? Hey, Finesse. I'm doing really well. Today's okay. I am mentally really excited and happy. Physically kind of tired. I had to do a lot of work outside this weekend, but we have some really nice positive effects from it. We have a full store of wood for the for the winter. And we redid our porch, and it looks amazing. It took work, but hey, it looks really, really nice now. So, Drop Bear says, "Hi, I don't understand. There's more than one side to history." Yeah, there are frequently many sides to history, and that's the crazy thing. All right, so here we go. We'll sort of get on with it. Speaking of getting on with it, if you check your adventure points, I have added a new redemption to adventure points. And it's literally just called Get On With It. So if you find me rambling about something that is not necessarily involved with the topic, and you think that I need to be gently reminded to get back on topic, you can redeem Get On With It! And I'll get on with it. That's a bit of a joke from Monty Python. Get on with it! There we go, right away. So let's talk the history of Israel, part 2. If you haven't seen the first episode of this, you should go back eventually and check out the VOD for that. Gently in all caps. So you can go back and watch the VOD. We are not going to rehash everything that was in the first episode of this installed series, so be aware. We're going to start off right after the Arab-Israeli War, and it is important for us right away to look at a map. You know you gotta love the maps, right? Here's the map. Okay, so this is the map. And this map, of course, is 1949. So the Arab-Israeli War happened basically as soon as Israel declared itself an independent state. The countries around it, which were predominantly Arab in nature, those countries being Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and Egypt, all immediately launched a war against Israel. The mandated territorial lines that had been agreed upon by the United Nations were sort of thrown to the wind, and what we get left is this image right here. So in the blue area, what we see is the territory that is actually considered Egypt from 1949 until 1967. 67 is an important year. We won't actually get to that tonight because the build up to that is almost half of an episode itself. But we see a few things that are important to note. So up here in this top region, this region here being Syria, we can see disputed territory. This territory, which is around the Sea of Galilee, is referred to as the Golan Heights. That territory is going to be important. We see the west bank of the Jordan River, which is this area right here, which had originally been sort of designated as part of the territory for Palestinians under the original agreement of the builders of the country. It had then, at that point, basically been occupied by Jordan. Now, Jordan is actually going to claim this territory. There are a lot of countries that do not recognize Jordan's actual claim to the West Bank territory. We also have the city of the city of Jerusalem, which is basically right on the border, and parts of the city of Jerusalem are in the Jordanian zone, especially the parts of Jerusalem that might be particularly important to the Jewish faith, including a region that includes what is called the Wailing Wall. We also see down here the Gaza Strip. This territory had ostensibly been given over to the country of Israel, but upon the end of the Arab-Israeli War, the Gaza Strip is going to fall under the sort of protection and authority of the Egyptians. So we've got several different parties that are going to be involved in this situation right away. And right away, we can tell that there is a lot of kind of moving pieces stuff that are behind the scenes moving here. History is written by the victors. To know the full, accurate history, you have to have history written by the non-victors. Therefore, at least two sides to most historical accounts. Yes, there's that old famous Ethiopian proverb that until lions get historians, all history is going to be from the hunters. Sort of the good old-fashioned history is written by the victor thing. All right, so we're not going to recount the entire situation of the Arab-Israeli War, but basically Israel does win this, and all of the parties that were involved in the war are going to sign an armistice. They do not necessarily completely end the war, but they are going to agree to a general ceasefire. This is going to allow Israel to do many things. One of the first things is the election of their government, which is going to be called the Knesset. This is their version of Congress, Parliament, whatever you want to call it. It's just called the Knesset. It has 120 seats in it, and theoretically, all individuals that are free within the country of Israel that are of a certain amount of age and are citizens have the right to vote. Now, what we understand is that a lot of people at this time period were not necessarily going to be in a position to vote. We'll talk about Palestinian refugees in just a moment, but one of the things that I want to talk about just sort of right off the bat here is the guy that manages to take over, whose name is David Ben-Gurion. One of these days I'll figure out how to get this little box to stay centered in this little area. OBS does not make that easy to do. This guy is David Ben-Gurion. David Ben-Gurion is the head of the Mapai Party. The Mapai Party is going to lead the coalition in the first government, and David Ben-Gurion is going to be elected the first prime minister. Now, he had already been very involved with the formation of Israel. He had been one of the leaders of the sort of push to get external funds into Israel. And this guy is going to be pretty big and pretty central to basically everything that we're going to talk about tonight. That we are the knights who say Knesset. Indeed. So in 49, in January, they have their election. Ben-Gurion's party is the biggest winner of seats. He forms the ruling coalition, and he becomes the first prime minister. One of the first things right off the bat that happens in the formation of their first government is that there were people that were inside of Israel that were from a party that were pro-Stalinist. So, of course, by the time we get to 49, we are in the Cold War, and countries are being expected to sort of pick sides. Do we line up with the Stalinist Russian communist angle, or do we line up with the more Western sort of capitalist democratic angle? And there is an opportunity for Ben-Gurion to form a coalition with several of the members of parliament. Well, I guess they're technically called members of Knesset, MKs, not MPs. I'm sorry, I'm stuck speaking British in my head. Ben-Gurion has the opportunity to form a coalition with some of these Stalinist groups, but he notably refuses to do so. And this is going to send a fairly important signal to Stalin that he does not necessarily have a friend in Israel. That does not mean that he completely shuts the door on that, and there are going to be dealings, of course, between Stalin's Russia and Israel as things go. But at the moment, it's pretty clear that Ben-Gurion has decided Israel is not going to be a communist ally. So, let's talk about the UN. Once they have their government and they have several big votes, one of the things that Israel does is officially join the United Nations. This happens also in 1949, and there is a really important series of debates and deliberations, and the United Nations is going to form something that's called UNRWA. It's clearly this, UNWRA. And this stands for the United Nations Relief and Work Agency for Palestinian Refugees. Or for short, the United Nations Relief and Work Agency. But this specific group is designated and pointed to this problem with Palestinian refugees that exists within Israel. Listeners of Shane's gloss over them joining the UN. I guess joining the UN was easier back then. Well, here's the thing. When they joined the UN, they had the support of basically all of the major countries already. Let's remember that the creation of Israel was something that the UN had a direct hand in already. So when Britain decides to sort of throw their hands up and say we're done with Palestine mandate, one of the big forces that steps in to sort of help the creation of Israel actually happen is the United Nations. So there were a supporting coalition of countries within the United Nations that already had the idea that Israel was going to join once they selected their government and set themselves up and got themselves running. So they were already like half members already. They basically just had to form their government and then vote on a petition to join the UN. So the UN was already deeply involved in this scenario. This is not something that was as contentious as a country today joining. Now, that being said, there were countries that did not support Israel joining the United Nations. And those countries are the members of what is known at that time as the Arab League. The Arab League are countries like Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, Iraq, and that begins to grow. Later on, you have the addition of countries like Libya, Tunisia, Morocco, Sudan, countries that were joined with Arab solidarity and were going to very vehemently take the side of the Palestinian refugees in opposition to Israeli statehood. So those voices were heard, but they were ultimately way overruled. There were people that voted against Israel joining the UN, but the vote was way lopsided and Israel got in pretty easily. So this UNWRA group is really important because they are going to give us something that has been a sticking point in deliberations between Palestinians and Israelis since it came out. And that is a definition of what the UNWRA said was a refugee. Now, I know that seems like not that big of a deal, but this definition is actually ridiculously important. And the wording of it was such that it left a lot of things unclear, and because it has not necessarily been widely overhauled since it was first created in 1949, causes significant issues still today. So here's the UN definition of what qualifies as a Palestinian refugee, and I'll read it to you verbatim, all right? A refugee definition: persons whose regular place of residence was Palestine during the period 1 June 1946 to 15 May 1948, and who lost both home and means of livelihood as a result of the 1948 conflict. So we have some criteria here. People who lived in this area, so lived within the boundaries of Israel, but the specific date is important. They lived in this area from June the 1st, 1946 to May the 15th, 1948. So this United Nations definition does not take into account any Palestinian individual who claims to have lost home or land prior to Israel becoming a nation. And there are lots of those people. So they are not included at this point in history as a Palestinian refugee, even though they might very well have been displaced by Jewish activity. Okay, so there's one thing. Also, who lost both home and means of livelihood as a result of the 1948 conflict. So what this means is they had to have lost both their home and how they made their money. If they could make money doing something else, that does not qualify them as a refugee. If they only lost their job and they did not actually lose their house because of the conflict, they lost it later to things like not being able to pay their debt, that does not qualify them as a refugee status. So the way this particular phrase has been written leaves a lot to answer for. And there are a lot of people that this does not qualify as refugee, and therefore it did not necessarily qualify them for aid. Even if they did not live in their homes, even if they did not have access to their land or their possessions, even if they did not have a verifiable or legitimate way to make money, they might not be able to qualify as a Palestinian refugee. So there are problems with this definition. And even today, there are still problems with this definition because stuff has happened since then, and the definition necessarily, for all intents and purposes, it's the same thing. But as we understand, someone that was alive in 1946 is not necessarily still alive today. Even so, in 1949, when UNRWA starts taking applications for refugee status, it takes them quite some time. By 1950, there are 700,000 Palestinians that had signed up for aid under the United Nations aegis. And these people are going to basically look to the United Nations for everything. And there are rules to how the UNRWA works with foreign countries. Other countries like Egypt and Syria and Lebanon and Jordan had taken in Palestinian refugees and had settled them into camps along the border. However, for those particular refugee camps to have UN recognition, there's a process that they have to go through. And if those people did not know that they had to basically apply for their camp to be considered a refugee status, and then the United Nations worked out some sort of deal for administration with the host country, those people might have not even been counted. So there are lots of loopholes, and this is by no means a comprehensive strategy to handle this issue. Israel at the time was determined that everything that they had done was completely legal and legitimate, and there were no real motions within the Knesset or the leadership of Israel to sort of blanket allow Palestinians to return to their homes. There were always going to be talks, and in the background of basically everything that we talk about today, there are going to be talks. And the concept of allowing a return for Palestinian refugees is going to be a bartering tool that both sides want to use towards their own goals. And because we are aware today that there are still Palestinian refugees, this kind of spoiler alert, it doesn't get solved. There are points where it could, and there are points where things happen, but it's not good. All right, so that's sort of the situation that we're dealing with the government, and that's the sort of situation that we're dealing in right now with the Palestinian refugees. But the country as a whole, what does Israel look like as a whole at this point? Let me tell you, it does not look good. Israel as a country is broke. I mean, flat broke. The amount of money that they were making in tax revenues made maybe a third of their spending. So they were running basically 66 to 67% budget deficits every single year. They were making up some of that money with donations from the West, especially donations from rich Jewish individuals in America and rich Jewish individuals in places like Britain. But even that did not cover the gap. And for the majority of the early 1950s, Israel is going to be a country that is in dire need of funds. Turns out when you start a new country, it helps to have money. And Israel had no money. There were lots of agencies that were willing to offer them credit, but their credit did not last very far. By 1951, most of the foreign creditors had basically said, Israel, you aren't paying any returns on your loans. We can't actually give you any more. To complicate that situation, there were more people coming to Israel. And part of this has to do with what's going on in the Arab nations around Israel. So when Israel was declared a country, initially, most of the countries did not allow their Jewish populations to immigrate. So immigrate with an E. Basically, countries like Iraq and Morocco and Egypt and Syria did not allow the Jewish population within their borders to move to Israel. They basically shut them down and would not let them out. This does not mean that there weren't sort of subterfuge efforts to sneak these people out, and several times lots of people did manage to get sneaked out. There were large groups of people from Yemen that got sneaked out. There were some people from Africa that managed to sneak into Israel. But the idea here is that these Arab countries did not want Israel to get more population that were Jewish, because the balance of Jewish to Palestinian or Jewish to Arab inside of Israel was already growing more on the Jewish side of the scales than it was the Palestinian side of the scales. So if all of these Jewish people left these Arab countries and went to Israel, this was going to create a situation where Israel would effectively become a Jewish state. And even though there were Arab people voting, their political voices would never be heard because they would be ultimately drowned out. However, when Israel looks like it's about to fall down and everyone knows that their infrastructure is non-existent, their pockets are empty, a lot of these Arab countries lessen or completely eliminate these rules that allow people not to move to Israel. Now, Part of this is because the Jewish populations within these countries were potential covert operatives. Part of the reason is that a lot of these countries were under wider global pressures, especially from big corporations in America and the western part of Europe, to let these people go to Israel. But there's also the element of, hey, they're reeling. They can't pay for the people that they have. If we send them several thousand more people or several million more people, it's just going to push them over the edge and they're going to collapse. So this is a bit of a calculated decision here. No money, isn't that a sign you haven't had a war recent enough? Well, part of the issue is that they had had a war very recently and they didn't have the money to even afford that. So, in less than a decade, the population of Israel goes from about 800,000 people to over 2 million people. And when you're in a country that's already in financial shambles, that can't get foreign credit anymore, that is living basically on the donation of foreign Jewish people, and you more than double your population in a decade, this is real problem. Just have another war. They're working on that. There will be another one in just a bit. But it's not because of money. So, what is the government to do? Well, Ben-Gurion decides that the best thing and the only thing that they can do is basically force austerity. And they put rations on lots of food and day-to-day goods. The calorie restrictions for some of these diets are down in like 1,600 range. Now, you're not going to die from 1,600 calories a day, but this is also not necessarily a super full, happy diet that we might consider in the West, right? And a lot of these people, especially the ones trying to build the infrastructure and try to go out and do stuff like, we need to build roads, or we need to build waterways, or we need to build the defense system. If you're stuck on not many calories, there we go. So this is also going to cause a gigantic black market to pop up inside of Israel, where people are, of course, trying to sneak in food and get luxury items and get more goods and such of things like this. And what's really unfortunate for the Israeli people is that better than the 500-calorie forced diets of World War II. Yeah, it is, but that's a different time. So even with the diets and even with the your little book of coupons, this doesn't fix the deficit because the population is growing faster than the austerity can keep up. So how then are we to basically handle the economic structure inside of Israel? Well, let me tell you. This guy, Moshe Sherratt, who is this gentleman. Moshe Sherratt was, at the time, the foreign minister for Israel. And one of the things that he had spent a ton of time working on was dealing with West Germany. And Sherratt is going to work out a deal with West Germany whereby West Germany is going to pay reparations effectively for the Holocaust. So, talking about my reparations. Yeah. Here's the deal, though. West Germany agrees to pay Israel 3 billion marks. And you have to remember, 3 billion marks back then is huge amounts of money. Remember, this is in 1951. So we all know that inflation happens. I don't know how much that was sort of in reverse, like going back to compare a West German mark to a dollar and then calculate that for inflation and then turn it into today's money. I don't know what that would be in today's money, but I know back then that was an absolutely enormous amount of money. 3 billion marks was huge sum. And they were going to pay this to Israel. You're guessing interwar inflation had calmed down since the end of World War II. Yes, and most of this is because of the rebuilding of Germany that happened under the guise of the United States and Great Britain. That sort of put West Germany back together. Oh yeah. So the inflation stuff that was happening under the Weimar Republic, that stuff that's been way settled. So this is a huge amount of money, but there are strings attached to it. 2 million Jewish people died in the Holocaust. No, there were 12 million people that died in the Holocaust, and the number of Jewish people was closer. Well, first off, let me pause and say we don't actually know hard numbers of how many people died in the Holocaust. The modern best estimates are in the range of 12 million people. And roughly half to a little bit more than half of them were Jewish, but there were also people that were, like Roma, people that were mentally handicapped, people that were physically disabled, people that were mentally disabled, lots of prisoners of war. So there were about 12 million people that got killed in the Holocaust. Hey, David. So part of what Shiggy is kind of joking about here is that, we're trying to figure out how many dollars we get per person. There were big reservations about this reparation deal inside of Israel. Because one of the things that sort of rode with this reparations agreement was that Israel was going to normalize relationships with West Germany. Basically, forgive the German people. And there were a lot of people inside of Israel that campaigned really, really heavily against taking this deal. And I do want to pause for a moment to clarify, or not to clarify, but to put into our heads. Let's remember, Israel was economically flatlining. This money was an astronomically large amount, and there were still people that were saying it's not enough to make it right. Whether or not it was enough to make it right, the Jewish people decided to have a vote on it, and the Knesset did pass the bill, but it was very close. Some people abstained from voting, and it passed with basically 61 votes, which is one vote more than half. So it was not a universally popular bill. However, when that money started coming in, the agreement was that Germany was going to pay a certain amount of money each year. And the way that the situation worked was that the money would be delivered from the German bank to some Israeli ambassadorial people that were in Germany, and then those people would communicate with the home government of Israel on how to spend that money. A lot of that money actually went sort of back into the West German economy, because one of the things that Israel needed was manufacturing equipment. They needed machinery, they needed trucks, they needed cranes, they needed basically the stuff that you would use to build infrastructure. Cement mixers, dump trucks, bulldozers. They didn't have that stuff, right? They're trying to build their country from scratch. So, it's stuff that they need. You've heard the estimates of 30 million people died in the Holocaust. Drop Bear, that is really, really high. And I know where you're coming from. There are people that estimate it being that high, because the way that they come up with this number is by sort of educated extrapolation. that number is a little bit higher than I feel comfortable supporting, and I'll tell you why. I don't ever want to just say, I don't think that's right, and then just sort of leave it there. The lower numbers are based much more on census data. So I think it's okay to admit that there were probably more than 12 million people because, as it were, in the census rolls that led up to World War II, there were a lot of people that were Jewish that were literally considered not citizens and sort of resident aliens that would not have shown up on the census data in the first place. They would not necessarily have shown up on taxpayer rolls. They might not have even necessarily showed up on birth certificates. So it is okay in my book to say there were probably more than 12 million people that died, but I don't know if I can go all the way up to 30 million people because that is based on a lot of percentages, and they say stuff like if this big city in Poland that we know had a population of X percentage Jewish people was completely wiped out, and we don't have records of this many people, those number of people must have died. And because records are so hard to find, and because stuff is so hard to trace, and because a lot of people literally changed their names and went completely incognito, we don't know where a lot of those people went. So I don't think I can necessarily get on board with the 30 million, but I am comfortable with saying at least 12 million and probably more. So I hope that explains where I stand. Read the book The Badlands for the best study on how many people actually died in the Holocaust between Germany and Russia. Weird question. Did they actually have to transport the money, or could we just ship an IOU with West Germany's name on it? So they were paying several $1 million a year over the course of, I think it was 14 years or maybe 15 years. And it was not all done in cash movement. There was some cash involved, but a lot of it was sort of a line of credit from the German government to the Israeli people that they could then sort of spend out with Germany's government backing that. To be honest, once you get past 1 million deaths, it sort of all blends together. It just becomes a lot. Oh yeah, it is a lot. You're not arguing. You're saying, oh yeah. I'm with you. I wasn't trying to get back at you either. I just tried to explain why I believe what I believe. Lots of folk. 10 people dying is a tragedy. 100 people, $1,000 is, or 100,000 people dying is a statistic. Yeah. So the Holocaust was a horrible thing, and that is going to play into this. We'll come back to this a little bit later as well. That mental weight of trying to deal with that in exchange for money was something that a lot of Jewish people did not want to do. And the reparations deal with West Germany was not popular universally. It mostly passed because Ben-Gurion, Moshe Sharett and Ben-Gurion were very, very close allies. And Ben-Gurion was pushing really hard to get this done because he was looking at it from the angle of, if we don't get money, our country will fail. But they use this money to do stuff like build railroads. They use this money to build ports so that they can establish international trade. They begin working on canals to start dealing with some of the problems with water, especially in their southern part of the territory. Your resident token Israeli is here. Hey, Cave. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on any of this stuff. Feel free to share your particular perspective on any of this stuff from someone that has lived in Israel. I would actually really appreciate that. So the reparations deal starts negotiation in 1951. It is signed in 1953, and Israel and West Germany sort of make their arrangement. Now, that is going to solve the economic crisis, but there are other really big problems. And one of the biggest problems is actually schools. What to do with a school. Because there are different kinds of people in Israel at this point. There are Jewish people that are very, very conservative Jewish people. There are Jewish people that we would call very liberal Jewish people. And then there are Arab people. But there are also Christians that are Arab and Christians that are Semitic. So there are lots of different groups. And even within the within the Knesset, there are arguments between liberal party Jewish individuals and very conservative party Jewish individuals. Yeah, I can't type and talk at the same time, can I? School. Maybe I need to go back to school. So, what to do with schools? This is a big, big debate. Now, when Israel had started passing laws with the first Knesset, they had designated Hebrew and Arabic as their official languages, but which language do you teach in school? What language do the teachers in school speak? This is a big question, right? Hey, Batbird, good to see you. So, what do you talk about history-wise? As the resident dyslexic, it makes sense. Yeah, so I'm right there with you. But I have a problem where I can't type and talk at the same time, and I think this has been very well established, and I also wasn't looking at it. Anyway, so there's a big debate. And unfortunately for the Arab people, the Christian people, and the non-involved Semitic people, the two big groups that are going to dominate this debate are the liberal Jewish faction and the very conservative Jewish faction. So how do we teach history in Israel? How do we teach language in Israel? How do we teach about what we believe? What Israeli values are we valuing? How are we raising the next generation of our people? And if you don't think that education has a long way to go towards changing the future of your nation, look at what happened to China once Mao changed the curriculum. Now, I'm not trying to compare the secular socialist Jewish people that won this debate to Chairman Mao. I'm trying to use this as a basis of understanding that education is super important to the way that people think. What you grow up learning is sometimes the only thing that you know, right? So the people that end up winning the debate are, again, the secular socialist Jewish people. Now, what's interesting is that for a little while, the curriculum that's put forward does appear to be rather secular and sort of socialist point of view. But after about the next two elections, some of the people that take over the educational system in Israel are going to be a coalition of two very conservative Jewish political parties. So that eventually starts to change a little bit and becomes a sticking point, especially for Palestinian people that are living inside of Israel that are not refugees, and people that are not Jewish or Arab, so the Christian populations. Words are hard. They are. So this school issue is a big deal. What about the other people that live in Israel? What about the people that are designated refugees? Well, the UNRWA is basically going to be in charge of education for all of the Palestinian camps. So if you are a Palestinian claiming to have refugee status, you are almost certainly not going to fall under the majority of the official Israeli schooling. You're not going to be a part of the school system to begin with. To a large extent, you are excluded from the school system as you are not necessarily considered a citizen, but you can be if you want to be, but you lose some rights if you do, and you gain some rights if you do. It's a balancing act. And the UNRWA does what it can to offer education within the camps, and they are still one of the people involved with education within the Palestinian refugee diaspora. So this is not necessarily a solved situation. There is a rule or a law that gets passed in Israel that you have to do mandatory education until you're 14. So that is something that is not necessarily heavily debated on, unless you don't want your kid in this school where they're going to be taught the Israeli point of view, because you don't necessarily share that point of view. So to sort of make an analogy from this, if you've lived in the United States and you have been around during the debate of teaching evolution in school or teaching intelligent design in school, you know that there are regional differences. There are political differences. The Conservative Party in the United States tends to not want to just teach evolution. They tend to want to try to teach in what they call intelligent design, which is very heavily based on their particular religious points of view. People that are on the other side, the Democratic Party, tend to want to teach evolution, which is not necessarily based on their religious point of view, but on what they consider scientific fact and what is scientific fact. So we have this stuff going on here in the United States. We also have that going on not just in evolution, but here recently we've had this debate about what version of our history do we teach? Do we acknowledge that history was a slave-owning country? Do we acknowledge that America has done things that are wrong, or do we just focus on the great things that we have done? This is where you get 1619 Project, 1776 Project, all these people arguing back and forth. You get the buzzword of critical race theory, which nobody can really explain. Everybody just knows that they're either for it or against it. So that's the same kind of thing here, but imagine that a substantial portion of our population aren't actually considered full citizens and they're living in camps, and we're still having that debate. So that's a bit more analogous to the situation that we're living in here at this period of time in Israel. So, as you might expect, there is not going to be universal peace. The public school system curriculum was highly censored and biased. Yes, it absolutely was. And just like it is here in the United States to a certain extent. Not as badly, but it was. Okay, so let's talk about Fedayeen. Fedayeen is a term. Universal peas are hard to come by. Yeah, it's hard to find a pea that you can plant anywhere that'll grow, right? Hey, you moose. Universal peas. So who are the Fedayeen? Well, there are a lot of people in the Arab world that were not pleased with the way that Israel was handling things, that were not pleased with the treatment of Palestinians, and that were not necessarily pleased with the fact that Israel was, at that time, a Jewish state that existed. And Fedayeen are people that were going to begin taking up arms against the Israelis. Now, if you'll remember me showing you on the map, there are already zones of Israel that were considered kind of hot zones. The places like the West Bank of the Jordan River, the Golan Heights, the Gaza Strip. These areas were mostly Arab and mostly anti-Israel. And the countries around Israel, like Egypt and Jordan and Lebanon and Syria, were going to support some of these Arab people in attempts to go into Israel covertly and cause trouble. These might involve targeting infrastructure by blowing stuff up like bridges. This might cause, or might be done to cause terror. This might be done to just cause chaos. So Fedayeen were people that were going to go into Israel and try to mess Israel up however they could manage it. And they were getting support from the external Arab countries as well as the Palestinian network within Israel itself. And these border zones are super duper high tension. Israel as a state at that point was absolutely ironclad determined to keep their borders on lockdown. They were going to enforce these demilitarized zones that came as part of the armistice in 49. They were going to be darn sure that nobody was going to get across these. And what that meant was they patrolled a lot of these borders very actively with active military personnel. And there had already been skirmishes along the border where, and let me just be honest here, there were some of these skirmishes that are written down in history. Like, we know this thing happened. And this side says we shot to protect ourselves, and the other side says we shot to protect ourselves. And in some of these situations, there's no real way to know anymore who actually started the shooting. Both sides have their opinions on stuff. Of course, both sides are going to believe that their individuals were not the aggressors in the situation. That causes differences of opinions, and that had already caused a significant amount of stress, especially along these border demilitarized zones of occupied territory like the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and the Golan Heights. So these Fedayeen were coming into Israel and targeting Israeli citizens, businesses, and infrastructure. And when this happened, initially, the Israeli government did not really understand what was going on, but later, someone flicked a booger at someone else. It's a story as old as time. Well, there we go. But who did the flicking, and who was the flicker, and who was the flickee? This is somewhat lost in the shuffle. Now, there were instances once the Israeli intelligence group, which is known as the Mossad, I should put this... once the Israeli intelligence groups began to sort of keep tabs on all of this stuff and keep eyeballs on all of this stuff, they're going to be much more aware of when these people come into Israel, and they're going to be much more aware of where they're coming in, where they're going when they go back across the border, etc., etc. It wasn't a booger, it was a nail clipping. Alas, that's even well, I don't know. I'd rather take a nail clipping than a booger. Let he who is without sin cast the first stone. Indeed. Couldn't you tell based on who has a booger stuck to them, assuming no self-booger sabotage? Well, you also have to look at both sides, because once the first guy flicks the booger, the second guy's going to flick another one right back at him. So both sides have boogers on them. You just don't know who flicked it first, right? And I'm not scratching my nose because I'm instigating booger. When I start streaming, for whatever reason, my nose just decides that it's full of itch. You cannot assume self-booger sabotage. But you also cannot discredit self-booger sabotage. So there we go. All right. So these Fedayeen invasions are problematic. And once the Mossad gets involved and the Israeli defense forces get involved, I'm being visited by a puppy, by the way. There are going to be repercussions, and the do you want to come up here and see me? Okay, give me just a second. I apologize for stopping in the middle of Fedayeen invasions, but we're being puppy invaded, and she wants to come and see me. Come here. Come here. Come here. Come on. Oh, yes. What we needed was a puppy. Just put the puppy in charge of the border zone. Oh, yes, and you would just lick everybody and give everybody sugars. Oh, my goodness. Oh, yes. That's what everybody wants, is a puppy. It's a good girl, though. It's such a good girl. Oh, yeah. You need some more sugars? Oh, thank you. Oh, the puppy. There we go. There's a little bit of a puppy break. Yeah, gotta love free puppy in the tense discussions, right? Okay, so let me give you an example of one of these instances around this place called Kibya. So in the particular instance, some Fedayeen came across into Israel and killed a couple of Israeli citizens. And one of the guys that was sort of targeted with running a lot of the anti-Fedayeen activities was this guy named Ariel Sharon. And this is Sharon here in his army material, clothing, such. Sharon goes on to be a big politician and one of the leading politicians in Israel for quite some time. Has the top spot for a little bit. Anyway, so some Fedayeen crossover. They kill a couple of Israeli citizens, and Sharon is going to take a strike force into the West Bank to this place called Kibbutz, and basically wipes out the village of Kibbutz. Kills at least 70 Arabs that were living in that area, burns down most of the buildings, destroys a couple of more, and then comes back over to Israel. And this sort of activity was very lopsided, and it was very, what we might call, disproportionate. And that cannot be doubted. The facts are, there were a couple of Israeli citizens killed. Israel took a strike force into Kibbutz, killed 70 Arabs, and blew up most of the city. Now, this is where we get to the point where we have a lot of people that want to talk one way or the other. People that are pro-Palestinian tend to say, well, this is massively disproportionate. They could have just found the people that were involved, bring them on trial, and, do whatever. But if you're looking at this from the pro-Israel side, what you're saying is you have to act disproportionately because Israel is massively outnumbered by the Arab countries surrounding it. And even though the country of Israel had been in direct conversation with the governments of places like Egypt and Jordan and Syria and Lebanon to try to get the Fedayeen invasions to stop, those countries had basically told Israel, we can't stop them. So how else was Israel to respond except for disproportionately? I'm not going to come down on one side or the other. You can come down on whatever side you think on. I'm just trying to present both sides of the discussion here. This, though, does become a significant problem, and it's going to get even bigger. Now, but Kanye said, let's not ever start a legitimate discussion with, but Kanye said. I'm sorry, I just can't get into that. Anyway, so things look more or less okay. And in 53, David Ben-Gurion is going to retire. And he actually goes off to kind of live out his life in a rural setting. And his sort of good buddy, Moshe Sharett, is once again going to be involved. He is going to move up to the spot of prime minister. This, of course, is the guy that had sort of negotiated the West Germany reparations deal. And Sharett is going to become the prime minister. Here's the thing, though. But Kanye is the cooler Kanye, though. I'm a butt genius. I don't even know what that means, Moose. I don't even know what that means. So, Sharett gets elected PM. And unfortunately for Sharett, things go almost immediately bad for him. And a lot of that stuff is because of a guy in Egypt named Gamal Abdel Nasser, who is this guy. Gamal Abdel Nasser. Nasser was a military leader inside of Egypt that led a coup and managed to take over, I'm sorry, not within Israel, within Egypt. Apologies. Nasser is basically at this point the new leader of Egypt. And because he is the new leader of Egypt, there are a lot of eyes on Egypt. Egypt was an unaligned nation, and everybody wanted Egypt on their side. The Russians wanted Egypt on their side. The United States, of course, wanted Egypt on their side. And the United States is going to see a particularly interesting opportunity with Nasser, that being he was not very pro-Britain or France. And Britain and France both had a particularly significant interest inside of Egypt, and that was this thing, the Suez Canal, which at the time was basically being held under British and French co-ownership. And the Americans would very much like to kind of break up that British and French alliance and maybe make Egypt a bit more pro-America because, you know, America. He led a coup from Samurai Jack. No. I need to watch the end of Samurai Jack. The new stuff that came out, I haven't had a chance to watch it yet. So, United States was pushing Nasser away from the British and away from the French. But here's the thing. The country of Israel was very scared of that idea. The Israeli government had a very close working relationship with both the British and the French. And they were afraid that if Nasser became sort of unaligned from the British and the French and was a strong person on his own, that would be really bad for Israel. So, some stuff goes down. And the stuff is mostly going to involve this guy named Pinchas Lavon, who is this guy. He was, at the time, one of the cabinet members of the Israeli government. He was a defense minister. And some stuff goes down. There are some Israelis that are living in Egypt that decide we need to make the British and the French stay. We need to convince them that Egypt is not actually as stable as Nasser is saying. We need to convince them to keep their presence in the Sinai around the Suez because this is going to be best for Israeli futures. So these Israeli commandos are going to plant a lot of bombs. And they plant these in American buildings and British buildings and in several public places. It does not go off very well. The bombs are sometimes duds, and it was not a very well planned situation. And 11 of these Israelis end up getting arrested and put on trial in Egypt. And along the way, of course, all of this stuff is just blowing up, metaphorically speaking, in the media, and this is making Israel look really, really bad. Because Egypt at that point had not done anything to this level to sort of provoke Israel since the ceasefire. Now, were there Fedayeen leaving Egypt and the Gaza Strip going into Israel? Absolutely. Had there been some border skirmishes? Absolutely. But had Egypt sent in like organized commandos to bomb public buildings? It depends on how much you think the Fedayeen were allied with the actual Egyptian government. We don't really necessarily know. It does seem like, based on the media, though, that this was going to be something that just smeared egg all over the Israeli world. And the entire affair gets pinned on Lavon. And this is what's going to be called the Lavon affair. Because when all these people end up going to jail, the people in Israel want to know why there are Israeli citizens in Egyptian jails. And the government has to answer. And Moshe Sharet goes, I don't know. He didn't know anything about it. Or he says that he doesn't know anything about it. Now, Lavon also said that he didn't know anything about it. He said that these were independent operators. That's why it was so badly done. But somebody has to take the fall for this. And Pinchas Lavon is the guy that's going to take the fall. I'm sorry, Pinchas. It's Pinhas. But you have to do the for the H. Boba Fett, hey, how's it going? I'm doing pretty well. How are you? So this is going to be a big problem for Charette. So Levon is going to have to quit. And now we need a new defense minister. So who's going to be the defense minister? They call David Ben-Gurion. And they say, hey, we know that you're retired. We need you to come back and be defense minister. So David Ben-Gurion comes back and becomes defense minister. But we all know that that's not going to really be that way for long, because this situation between Egypt and Israel is not settled. And in fact, it's about to get a lot worse. Well, I needed to hit an enter there, didn't I? All right. So Charette is prime minister, Ben-Gurion is defense minister, and some stuff goes down. There's a Fedayeen attack. The Fedayeen attackers sort of get thwarted in mid-attack, and one of the Fedayeen individuals gets arrested, and on his person, he has Egyptian army papers. And now this is a kind of smoking gun moment. Like, oh, really? So now there is tangential justification that there are people within the official Egyptian army that are involved with this Fedayeen. Now, Egypt says, you know, these people are not acting under orders. They're doing this unilaterally. They're not doing this because we've commanded them to do that. But there is some link now between Fedayeen attacks and a government Egyptian organization. So here comes Operation Black Arrow. There's a big debate that goes on. Moshe Charette said, we need to publicize all of this. We need to use the media as our weapon. We need to win back. We basically need to recover face, right? Because the Levon affair had really turned a lot of people's opinions against Israel. And Moshe Charette was like, we can use this as leverage to get back in sort of the good graces of a lot of people. Ben-Gurion goes, no, we've got to kill him. And Ben-Gurion wins. Ariel Sharon is going to take a group of paratroopers into the Gaza Strip, and they are targeting an Egyptian supply convoy that is bringing supplies to one of the cities inside of the Gaza Strip that is the home to many of the Palestinian refugees. They blow it up. They kill 37 Egyptians. They injure a lot more, and they destroy the entire supply convoy. When this gets out, this is a big deal, because a lot of people inside of Israel are going to be like, that's right. If you're going to do this to us, we're going to do it right back to you. But a lot of people, especially people sort of outside of Israel, were looking at this as, man, it really seems like Israel is being super aggressive in this situation against Egypt. So it's not necessarily going to help the Israeli situation overall. And Charette recognizes that he's not necessarily going to be in a position to lead the government anymore. And in the next election, Charette basically steps aside, and Ben-Gurion once again becomes prime minister. This is in 55. Hey, Ben-Gurion, thinking like I was, just solve everything with war, right? But it gets messier. Ben-Gurion takes back over in 55, and Nasser in Egypt is not pleased with what's happening. And he comes up with a way to kind of stick it to Israel. The Suez Canal and the Gulf of Aqaba. So this region right here is called the Gulf of Aqaba. See, Gulf of Aqaba. This connects to an Israeli port right here. Ba-da-ba. See? Elliot. And Nasser makes the decision, for better or worse, Israel has perfected the nuke it from orbit approach in all but the literal sense so far. They should have used duct tape to stick it to Israel instead. A lot safer. Well, you have to be within touch range for an area of effect spell to work like that. They decide to take more of a area of effect approach instead of the touch range approach. And what they do is they decide ships from Israel can no longer use the Suez Canal, and they block off the Gulf of Aqaba from Israeli transport. Mage Hand is a cantrip, so I guess they could use that, but this is more of like the druid spell that does the hedgerow thing. Am I forgetting, or did many countries consider Nasser a terrorist, or was that a British thing? There were a lot of Western countries that were not cool with how Nasser took over, and were not cool with how Nasser ran the government. That is about to change. Yes, spike growth. There we go. If there's a bustle in your hedgerow, don't be alarmed now. It's just a sprinkling from the May Queen, right? So, yeah, there we go. So, Egypt shuts the Suez Canal. Egypt shuts off the Gulf of Aqaba. And then Nasser does something that is really big and gets a lot of people really, really upset. He nationalizes the Suez Canal. He basically uses the Egyptian military to push out the British and the French control of the Suez Canal and turns it into part of Egypt. Now, this makes a lot of people really upset, especially, as you might expect, the British and the French. Nasser then goes on to reach out to the communists, specifically to the Russians, and even more specifically to Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia at the time was basically the center of Russian gun production. And Nasser reaches out to Czechoslovakia and says, we want war materials, and lots of it. And they buy a huge amount of war materials from Czechoslovakia. And Nasser is saying very clearly in public, this is because of Operation Black Arrow. This is because the Israelis blew up civilians and killed our people. They killed these people all over the place. They destroyed supplies going to the Palestinians. Egypt has to be able to defend itself, and they start using the same argument that Israel uses about being able to defend itself against Israel. Hey, Atuna, good to see you. Yeah, you made it. And you're not right at the end. We've actually got quite a bit left to go. So, this situation is bad for Israel. They're in a pickle, which is especially bad for David because David hates pickles. I don't know why, but he just hates pickles. Anyway, so they're in a bad spot. They have had one of their biggest ports shut down. They cannot move back and forth through the Suez anymore. And Egypt is much more powerful right up on their border here in the Sinai. So what is Israel to do? Well, Ben Gurion reaches out to Britain and France. And he says, look, here's the deal. You don't like Egypt controlling the Suez. We don't like Egypt being in power. So what you can do is help us. Pickles are a contaminator. Pickles are a contaminator too. So they alter the taste of anything that they touch or anything that they are near. Man, I love pickles. You just landed in Burbank, waiting for your train home. Yeah, how was Dragon Con? I didn't even ask. Cave and Tuna, how was Dragon Con? Hope everybody came out okay and not COVID-y. I don't know why Google Earth is doing that, by the way. It's sort of driving me crazy. Let me check something real quick. Nope, that doesn't stop it. Hashtag letdown. You don't want to talk about Dragon Con? I'll ask you later. Okay, cool. Spoiler alert, there were no dragons. Pickles are delicious. Yes. Onions are the worst. I don't mind onions either. I like onions. It's a glitch in the Matrix? Maybe so. Anyway, Israel sits down with Britain and France and they work up this this plan. This, by the way, is what's referred to, this whole period of time is referred to as the Suez Crisis. This is in 1956. So here's what's going to happen. Israel is going to invade Egypt. Like, big land invasion of Egypt. And the guy that they put in charge of it is this guy. A guy named Moshe Dayan. Moshe Dayan. By the way, he had lost his eyeball in World War II. This is like he had done that before all of this stuff happening. Dayan is going to lead this invasion. The invasion itself is going to. I mean, he was. He didn't play. He was. You were hoping he just liked the eye patch. Eye patch means good general. History knows it to be true. So they lead this invasion, and when they invade, France and Britain decide that they're going to make this sort of joint declaration that Nasser has to give back the Suez Canal. And when Nasser says, of course, no, I'm not giving back the Suez Canal, this now gives the British and the French cover to attack Egypt. So the British and the French Air Force is going to bomb the devil out of the Egyptian Air Force and blow up some of their land forces as well. And the Israeli army is basically going to get all the way up to the Suez. So if we're looking at this map here, we see Israel invading along here, basically taking over the entire Sinai Peninsula. We see that the British and the French are going to land at Port Said in order to try to hold on to the canal itself. And what is going to end up happening is a really big stalemate. Because when this happens, the United Nations is going to respond overwhelmingly to try to shut this down. And they send the first United Nations peacekeeping force to the Sinai Peninsula. And they basically kind of draw a line between the Israeli troops and the Egyptian troops. And they put these United Nations troops in between them and say, we will not be having a big honking war right now. It's just not going to work. I would turn away and put yourself in a corner if that dude came walking towards you with any sort of purposeful walk. Smooth brain war. They could have just turned a big container sideways and called it a year. Well, they had already shut down the Suez, so it didn't need to be shut down again by a ship called the Evergreen. They just needed to... They wanted to unnationalize it and turn it back over to the control of the British and the French. So here's the thing. The UN gets involved. They make Israel back down. And once Israel does back down, they make the British and the French back down. And when that happens, Nasser keeps the Suez shut. So in the Suez crisis, Israel did not come out on top. And in fact, this was a pretty humiliating loss for them, and Nasser is particularly excited about this victory on his side. And what this is going to turn into is a pretty big organized effort to sort of crack down on all Israeli goods coming in or going out of Israel. And the Arab League is going to sort of use this as a springboard for what is effectively going to be pressure on the entire world to not do business with Israel. They're going to say that Israel was the aggressor in this situation. We were responding to their initial aggression. Our purchase of arms was to defend ourselves. Our nationalizing of the Suez Canal was to maintain our sovereignty in the face of British and French opposition. They proved that they were imperialist overlords when they tried to help Israel take all this land back. The United Nations came down on our side. We were in the right on all of this stuff. Israel is in the wrong, and we boycott them. So, random question. Why are they also up in arms about this southern trade route? Seems far less effective than Gibraltar. Okay, so part of the problem with closing the Suez to the Israelis is that it blocked their navy. So Israel does have a navy. It's very small, and it blocked their shipping from this part of Israel up here. They have ports that are on the Mediterranean, but they also have a port down here in the Gulf of Aqaba. So it's a lot faster to sort of just move here and around than it is to move from here all the way around and then all the way up and then all the way up into here. Plus, they couldn't go through the Gulf of Aqaba anyway because the Egyptian Navy had blocked them from that point as well. So they were in bad shape, and one of their biggest ports, Elliot, right down here, was effectively useless. Also, hey, a visual nomad, good to see you. We've got lots of folks here. Let's do the shout outs. I just found out last week that I Am Batbird streams, and you should go give I Am Batbird a follow. Fun little digital artist, good chat, nice place to hang out. You should go see him. We've got the visual nomad in the room. You should go follow Visual Nomad. We have the good version of abstract oil painting with amazing use of color that is both vivid but not overwhelming. Also great chat, good people. A-Lot. Thank you. Hey-Lot. Hey-Lat. Thank you, Cave Geek. See, this is where I do badly. A-Lat. Thank you. No H. Cool beans. We have the Cave Geek, who is correcting my pronunciation of Israeli cities. Cave Geek is a fantasy map maker and does a lot of other stuff as well on stream, but is a cool dude. You should go follow him. A lat. Emphasis on lat. We have David Peterson, who is author and illustrator of a comic book called Mouse Guard, one of my favorite comics. You should go follow David because he's a cool dude and does all sorts of cool stuff on stream. Who else do we have in here that I forgot to shout out? Am I forgetting anybody? I feel like I might be forgetting somebody. But I sort of always feel like I'm forgetting somebody. Also, I didn't say hey to Foggage. Hey, Foggage, good to see you. Sorry. Man, I'm bad tonight. All right. If there are other people that stream, I apologize for not immediately recognizing you. Speak now or forgetting... Well, I mean, Moose, you stream on Joby's channel. But he's not in chat, so I have to type the whole thing out. Go follow Joby so that on Sundays you can see Moose stream his podcast called The Art Condition, which is a great podcast. I've been on it before. David's been on it. Cave's been on it before. Talks about the function and form of doing art or creative stuff for a living. His name isn't too long. I just don't have the really quick shortcut stuff. I have to type it all the way out. It's the 11th best co-hosted art chat. I don't even know where the criteria for that comes from. Clearly the bar for being on the show is rather low. There we go. I knew I forgot somebody. We got Martest in the room. Go follow Martest. Also an art streamer here on Twitch. I see you. I knew I'd forgotten somebody. I almost always forget somebody. It's not that I do it on purpose. Okay. I forgot Steve. Is Steve here? Is Steve lurking? I didn't see Steve. Did I not give Steve a shout out last time he raided me? Oh, dude, that was horrible. If I did do that, that was bad on me. Alas. You managed to limbo under that bar every time. Figment, have they asked you to be on art condition? You should totally go be on art condition if they ask you. It's fun stuff. Okay, so Suez Crisis blows up in Israel's face. They are under a big sort of Arab League boycott. It is pretty bad. There are a lot of people that sort of have to cave to this. One of the groups is France. France had been selling a lot of arms to Israel. And because of international pressure as a fallout from the Arab League boycott and from the failure of the Suez Crisis, France stopped selling guns to Israel. So this is a real thing that actually does have repercussions. That was not the plan, but it just happened to be that way. So 1958, 1959 are not necessarily the best years for Israel's public image, but that is going to change quite a bit in 1960 because of the capture of a guy named Adolf Eichmann, who is this guy, who we see here on trial in Israel. Eichmann was a Nazi in the high rank of the Nazi command, and he was directly in charge of a lot of the stuff that had gone on at the prison camps and concentration camps during the Holocaust, and he had managed to escape. At the end of World War II, he had managed to get out of Germany, and he was hiding out in Argentina. But the Mossad had tracked Eichmann down. I'm sorry, I'm missing stuff in your chat. You forgot Mac and myself. Granted, neither of us stream and probably never will. This is a real thing that had repercussions. I like that phrase. Well, I mean, there we go. Since Nasser was apparently buying weapons just because of Israel, that means Nasser will stop buying guns, right? Nasser did not necessarily need to buy many more guns. There were deals made between some of the Soviet bloc countries and Egypt to replace material that had been destroyed by either the British, the French, or the Israelis during the Suez Crisis, but there was not necessarily a giant push for military proliferation inside of Egypt. Egypt was sitting pretty happy at that point. They had the sort of international opinion on their side. And Nasser was wise enough not to push that as far as he could have. He always sort of stayed just below the line of being full out, kind of warmonger, if you will. Real things, repercussions. If you ever have kids, you want to use that on them. I tend to say that in my class to my students a lot. Like, this is a real assignment. It has repercussions if you don't do it. I had to say that to some students today. So Eichmann gets arrested by the Mossad. He gets extradited to Israel, and over the course of about the next year and a half, he is going to go on trial. He's going to be convicted of basically most of the murders in these big prison camps that he had overseen. Israel is going to use this as a moment to really cement the awareness of the Holocaust in international minds, because in the trial, they're actually going to bring up people that survived the camps that Eichmann ran. And they're going to give firsthand testimony to how horrible a lot of this stuff was. And because there were already so many eyes on Israel at this time, this was going to really get the word across, like, look, yeah, the Holocaust really was that bad. It really was. And Eichmann, of course, is found guilty, and the three-panel of judges is going to give him the death penalty. They're going to appeal, of course, and it goes through a couple of different levels of the court system. But at the end of the day, in 1963, Eichmann is hanged, and he is held responsible for the deaths of many of the people from the Holocaust. And that's a pretty important moment in Israeli history. This is one of the only high-ranking Nazis that that actually got to be held to Israeli justice. Now, there were the Nuremberg trials, where some of the high-ranking Nazis had been put on international court and brought to international justice, but Eichmann was tried in Israeli court, and they got to carry out the sentence against him, and that is an important thing in a lot of people's minds inside of Israel. I hate fake assignments. I don't give fake assignments. If I give an assignment, it has a purpose, and it's going to be graded. That's just the way that it is. All right. Let's talk about a couple more things, and then we'll wrap up for the night. I know that we're already running pretty close to time, but we've got a couple things to talk about that are going to be important, including the 1960 land law. So, since Israel became a country, and since especially the end of the Arab-Israeli War, and especially since the armistice in 49, the government of Israel, which was under the control, once again, of Jewish politicians, almost completely Jewish politicians at that point, the government of Israel had been working on trying to find a way to basically solve the Palestinian land issue from their end. And this culminates in the 1960 land law. And very basically, the 1960 land law converted all land inside of Israel to, quote, Israel lands. And it said that the state of Israel owned all of the land that was currently unoccupied and all of the buildings on that land. Now, what does that actually mean? Sorry, I missed some things in chat here. Really, exam has repercussions? Who would have thought so? Yeah. It has to be awkward being the defense for Eichmann in Israel. Well, for justice to be carried out, everybody has to have a defense, So I don't think that I believe that the lawyer that was working for Eichmann was a German. I don't believe that it was a Jewish individual that was sort of like a public defender. I think that he was able to choose whichever lawyer he wanted. But yeah, I suspect that was a fairly tense position. Because it was massively popularized. Or it was all over the media. It was everywhere. So, the 1960 land law, let's say what it was meant to do, and then we'll say what it actually did. So, under ostensible levels or supposed levels, this law was done to ensure that the Israeli government could oversee the distribution of land. And it said, or many of the politicians that voted for this law said, that this was going to allow the government to make sure that Israeli citizens did not basically segregate or I'm losing my words here. What's the word I'm looking for where you exclude a group of people? Basically, the government said that this was to make sure that if an Arab person wanted to buy land in Israel, they could buy it because they could buy it from the government. They didn't have to buy it from an individual because individuals could say, no, you're Arab and I'm not going to sell anything to you. That's what they said it was. And a lot of people said that this was sort of done with good faith. And to a certain extent, because a lot of these people have passed on, we can't ask them. So to a certain extent, we have to take their word for it. However, I'll tell you what it did in practice. What it did in practice was effectively confiscate all Palestinian land that was not being occupied. And a lot of that land included land that was under dispute from Palestinians who had been displaced during the Arab-Israeli War. So at that point, because that land was unoccupied, the Israeli government said, we own all of this. And it's going to basically forbid the sale or transfer of lands without government oversight. And that, in effect, meant that the government could protect Arab rights, but it also means that the people that were doing the decisions on whether or not they were protecting Arab rights were Jewish politicians and people that worked for the Jewish government. Was everybody in Israel at that time anti-Arab? No. Are all the people that are in Israel now anti-Arab? No. Were a lot of the people that were in charge of Israel anti-Arab? Yes. It's just the facts. We can see it from the way that they speak. We can see it from their actual quotes. The 1960 land law might have been done with good intentions, but it is going to basically open the door for Israeli settlement on Palestinian land. And if you know anything about what's going on in Israel today, you will know that Israeli settlements in Palestinian land are one of the biggest problems that cause contention between the two sides today. And a lot of that goes right back to this 1960 land law. All right. So there's that. Let's talk about Shimon Peres. Now, Peres was a guy that was once again inside of the government of Israel, and he and Ben Gurion come up with this angle. Ben Gurion is determined. Ben Gurion is determined that Israel should have nuclear weapons. They say that it is, or he says that it is imperative to ensure the future of Israel. He said that it is imperative to basically keep people from treating Israel like some, little country that they can just invade whenever they feel like it. That the possession of nuclear weapons by Israel is a deterrent. He likely wasn't wrong. And I'm not coming down on one side or the other. I'm just saying that in his opinion, it was absolutely imperative that Israel get nuclear weapons. However, there were some issues with that. Israel had signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. That means they're not technically supposed to go start making nuclear weapons. Also, Israel does not have a nuclear weapons program. So Shimon Peres, who is... where'd my images go? That was Eichmann. This guy. Peres is going to basically spearhead Israel's first nuclear reactor. And it's at... I need to get back over here. So the nuclear reactor is referred to as the Dimona reactor. And Peres is going to work mostly through back channels with France and convince France on the down low that bum ba-dum, bum ba-dum, bum ba-dum, bum. Boba Bomber, thank you so much for that follow, and welcome to the adventure. Hope you're having a good one. Feel free to participate at whatever level is comfortable for you. All right, so the Domona reactor is something that has to be done in complete secrecy, like utter secrecy. The French are going to be the go-betweens, and the French companies that start building some of these parts that are going to be the actual Domona reactor that get over into Israel are just flat lied to. Some of the big water tanks that they use as cooling things they're going to say like, oh, this is as part of the desalination project that Israel has going. You know, they have that big, you know, problem with water, so they're trying to desalinate water. That's why they need all of these big, you know, water tanks and in kettles and you know, shielding and such, because they're going to evaporate all this stuff off and pull the salt out of it. Anyway, they managed to build the entire reactor in what is effectively utter secrecy. We don't actually, like we being the general public, don't really know anything about this until much later in Shimon Peres's life, when he sort of writes a tell-all book and lays a lot of this stuff out. But it turns out that a lot of other people knew what Israel was up to. So the reactor itself at Domona probably went critical in either 1961 or 1962, and it's not too long before nuclear bombs could evaporate water, so it isn't a lie. That is correct, Shiggy. That is technically correct. I don't know if it would necessarily make it desalinated for consumption, because then it would just be radioactive water, and we all know from playing Fallout that if you drink too many radioactive waters, you get rad poisoning, and you just can't do that. You gotta take rad away, right? Wonder where you desalinate that. Yeah, I don't know. Where do you de-radioactivize water? I don't even know how you do that. Anyway, so the reactor goes critical about 61 or 62, and this becomes a really big sticking point. And it becomes a big sticking point with this guy. My state doesn't have enough water as it is. Let's just not do that. Oh, California. Yeah, so critical means like they...
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus. Batbird, thank you so much for that gift sub. And Visual Nomad, welcome to the adventure. You get all the cool emotes, and you are now Spartacus. 11/22/63, indeed. So when the reactor goes critical, what that means is it basically starts being able to operate under its own. So like when you turn a nuclear reactor on, it takes a little while for all of the matter to actually go critical and start actually doing the reaction, right? So this isn't like it went into meltdown and died. This is just like it went online in like 61 or 62. Supercritical is bad, yes. Critical just means sort of operational, right? So critical refers to critical mass, which is the amount of material that it takes to turn a nuclear reactor on. And they're using plutonium in this particular reactor, and they are enriching plutonium, and it is suspected but not necessarily proven that by about 63, Israel has nuclear weapons. So they rolled a 20. Yeah, so it's like a critical hit, right? They do it really great, and it goes online, and it's starting to put out the power. But it's also putting out good old-fashioned fissile material that you can use to create nuclear weapons. And nuclear weapons were probably something that they had by 63. A lot of this is still kind of fuzzy. But the biggest piece of evidence, in my opinion, that we know of, or that I can suggest or point to, that Israel got nuclear weapons in 63 is that David Ben-Gurion is once again going to retire in 63. Now, I mentioned that there were some problems with this guy. This is, of course, John Kennedy, JFK, President of the United States. It's pretty clear based on data that has been released recently, this is not something that was widely known at the time, that Kennedy knew about the Israeli nuclear program. And he tried to basically negotiate with them. And the deal looks like, and let me be clear here, a lot of this stuff is speculation, a lot of this stuff is conjecture, and because all of these people are dead, we can't probably ever really completely know. But it looks like, at least in a pretty good shot, that Kennedy was trying to sort of strong-arm Ben-Gurion into accepting Palestinian refugees under the threat that if Ben-Gurion did not accept Palestinian refugees, Kennedy was going to reveal the nuclear program to the world, and then Israel would be right back in the crosshairs of media negativity. That clearly did not work. This possibly did not work because it did not go on long enough. Of course, Kennedy was killed in 63, and the Johnson administration had significantly less constraints about this. And in 65, this is a little bit after what we're going to talk about tonight, but in 65, Israel does allow some United States sort of overseers to come in and tour the nuclear facility and look at it. But the reason I think that the nuclear program was up and running and that they had nuclear weapons by 63 is because when Ben-Gurion resigns, I think that was sort of like his moment. Like, I think that Israel has to have nuclear weapons. Now that we have them, I think that I've done what I need to do, and then he quits. Now, to be fair, this thing with the United States appears to have been fairly volatile. There does appear to be a lot of pressure on Ben-Gurion. There had also been a lot of renewed attention back on the Levant affair. That whole thing with Egypt and Levant from back in the 50s that had sort of crept back up and had turned into a thing again. And by this point, Ben-Gurion was fairly old. To be fair... Thank you, Visual Nomad. I appreciate that. That's what I appreciate about you. Johnson, what a peach. Indeed. If you have not ever heard President Johnson orders slacks, go to YouTube as soon as we're done and look up President Johnson orders slacks. Foggage, do you not like Letterkenny? Are you an anti-Letterkenite? For those of you that don't know, Letterkenny is a show on Canadian Broadcasting TV, and it's rather delightful, and I appreciate the heck out of it. You're just surprised to hear it here. Wow, I'm glad to continue to exceed expectation. We'll just put it that way, right? I love Letterkenny. It's a great show. I've been trying to get Mac and KP to watch it forever, and I don't think either one of them are particularly excited about it. I don't have Hulu. I've told you can watch the whole thing on Daily Motion. I've even sent you links to the first episode, so don't act like you can't get there. Johnson also did show his male anatomy to other people in an attempt to intimidate them. Yeah, he's a weird dude. All right, so in 1963, Ben-Gurion retires. He picks his successor, a guy named Eshkol, and that is where we will end it tonight because, goodness gracious, that's a lot of material to cover. So, yeah. I actually considered trying to start this a little bit earlier to give us some more time, but I decided to just soldier on with what we had because I didn't necessarily want to upset the boat. However, this is not all of history, right? It's pretty clearly not all of Israeli history. So if people are interested, that's something to think about for the future. But we are done, and I am done, and now we get to that favorite phase where I ask if there's anybody that wants to turn in channel points for a viewer request show. Did showing his thing to intimidate everyone?
I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus.
Extended through May. Figment. Extended through May. Good gracious. That is incredibly generous. Holy moly. Figment, thank you so much. You're not Spartacus, leave me alone. Okay. Not acknowledging it anymore, but thank you. Nothing after this, though. Okay, so you're almost at 12k channel points. It's only a matter of time. Indeed. All right, so how about this? Let me go over here to the channel dashboard, and we'll just manage ourselves a little poll here. Let me get the last number 2. All right, so we are going to vote on a new topic. So we're bringing over the number 2 winner from the last poll, which was medieval Poland. And what I need from you all, and I'll take the first 3 that are legitimate, are 3 ideas of what you want to talk about next. All right, so we have the First Crusade, a good one. Nazi flight. I assume here, KP, that you're talking about Nazis that managed to get out of Germany and where they went. And religion in the Ottoman Empire. Oh, well, that's a good one. All right, so we are full up. Okay. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to click start the poll, and in just a moment, you will see above you in chat a little thing that is the poll. Everybody that is in the room gets to vote. If you are within the sound of my voice, you get to vote. You do not have to be a sub. You do not have to be a follower. If you're in the room, you can vote. So here we go. New poll. Boom. Go for it. What shall we cover next? Quick, get the dog in here. So up above you, click the little down arrow, and we will choose our topic. And we've got lots of motion already, just right off the bat. Lots of people moving around here. Interesting, interesting. Go vote. Make thy voice heard. Medieval Poland, so The Witcher. No, we don't have history of The Witcher. Let me call the puppy. Everybody can still vote. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. There are 11 votes, and there are 22 people in the room, so some people are not voting. Oh, there's the puppy, and she's got her chicken with her. Come and see me. Oh, do I need to... Okay, so I'm going to take the chicken from her to put it up here so that I can get her to come up in my lap. But she is not going to be pleased with that. Come here. Come here. Come here. Come see me. Come here. Come on. Come here. There we go. There's the puppy. Hello. There's Miss Kaylee Puppy. Want some sugars? Hey, you want your toy? You want to do a little bit of play? Like, arr. 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 You big furry mutt. Oh, you're so furry. Arr. Everybody go vote. All right. You want to catch the toy? You want to catch it? You ready? You ready? Let me see if I can get this a little bit higher. You ready? Oh, good catch. That's a good catch. And immediately leaves the room because you don't mess with the chicken. I took the chicken. I knew that I was going to be sinning against the puppy when I took the chicken.
You shall have camels, horses, an armed escort, provisions, desert vehicles,
and tanks. Shiggy, thank you so much for those bits, man. All right, Medieval Poland wins by a hair. Medieval Poland is an excellent topic. I'm excited about that. First Crusade is really close. It will carry over to the next poll, and yeah, we'll keep that one around. So next viewer request stream is Medieval Poland, and we'll cover mostly the part where Poland was a big deal. Like where Poland was a big empire that sort of ran Eastern Europe. First time one of your questions actually made it to a stream. Awesome. Well, now you're one of us, right? I mean, everybody's one of us, but like now you're like super special one of us. Also, thanks again for the bits. I really do appreciate that. All right, ladies and gents. Anybody else want to spend any channel points? Anybody want to do anything around the Adventure Point world? Otherwise, I'm going to start looking for someone to raid. Who shall we raid? Who's streaming right now? So many people streaming right now. Lots of people streaming right now. Who have we not raided in a while? Let's go raid Jay Hansen. We have not raided Jay Hansen in forever. Forever, ever? Okay, yeah, we're gonna go raid Jay Hansen. So, Jay Hansen is a digital artist. He does a lot of stuff with sort of pop cultural figures, popular wrestlers, video games, stuff like that. Oh, we're not going to raid yet. We're going to talk about what's in the news. What is in the news? So, the news is kind of crazy today because there's a lot of stuff going on, and it's unfortunately not all good. The biggest thing that we could talk about is probably Afghanistan, but I feel like that's almost an entire stream by itself. Other than that, I think what I can point at as a sign of potential forecast, something that people in the world should really kind of look at as what might be a bellwether for future elections, is what's going on in Germany. So for those of you that are not aware, Angela Merkel, who has led Germany for a long time now, has chosen to step down. And she has picked up a person that she wants to be sort of her successor, and her political party, which are basically like her political party and the people that she's aligned with are having a really rough go of it. Like right now, one of the biggest voting blocks inside of Germany are really conservative, and they are very pro sort of German nationalism stuff, and it is pretty clear that right now her chosen candidate is not in a position to win. She made a little bit of a sort of a gamble because the person that she chose to sort of endorse is not in her same party. So she's in a party that's called it's the Christian Democratic Union is the name of their party. And the political candidate that she chose from is from a center-right party. Her Christian Democratic Party is like a center-left party. So this is sort of an attempt to create a bit of a centrist party inside of Germany, but it's just not working. And I really worry about this rise of nationalist populism that seems to be becoming really, really prevalent in a lot of places in the world, like India, like America, like Belarus, Ukraine. Well, Ukraine's coming around a little bit, but anyway. So the news is usually like that. Aren't literal Nazis allowed to form? No, so the Nazi Party itself is illegal, and Nazi imagery is illegal in Germany. But there are parties that are in that nationalist, populist, very conservative wing of German politics that you might find a lot of people that are Nazis or Nazis or Nazi sympathizers. So there are homes for those people in some of the parties that are growing. Now, it should be noted, if I'm being fair and covering the whole thing, that in the last regional and local German elections, what is effectively the modern finger quote Nazi party, they're not actually Nazis, but the people that would most align with Nazi ideology, they did not do very well in local and regional elections. They basically came out with the same number of seats that they had before. So there's some hope to that. But you don't have to be a Nazi to be a hyper-nationalist populist voter. Are you now, or have you ever been, a globalist? I am what I would consider a realist when it comes to global politics. I don't know if I can say that everything about globalism is good, nor do I believe that everything about isolationism is good. I think that the answer is probably somewhere in the middle, and I know that seems to be a cop-out answer that a lot of people that don't know anything about it tend to give because they don't want to have the debate. But as a student of history and economics, I can tell you that globalism can be just as damaging as rampant isolationism. I think that if people were honest and treated each other fairly, a lot of the problems would go away. But because I know what happens in big empires, if we started treating the world like one big empire, that is going to give a lot of people in positions of power a lot of opportunities to push down ideas that they don't agree with. And here I specifically mean like regional ethnic minorities. Like if we look at what's going on in China, right? China is effectively building a regional empire in Asia. But what are they doing? They're saying, if you want to be part of our big empire, you have to be like us. And that means you can't be a Uyghur, you can't be a Hong Kong Republican, you can't be a Taiwanese individual. You have to be like the globe, and we're doing this stuff. Now they're blanketing a lot of that in pro-China ideology, but they're pretty clearly building an international globalist viewpoint where everything revolves around the pole that is China. And I understand that we can't live in isolation bubbles, and I'm not advocating for isolation bubbles. What I'm advocating for is honest and open trade and exchange of ideas, and to get greed out of the picture and to focus more on problems that we can solve together while recognizing that some problems are best solved at home. So You feel silly mentioning video game time next to their treatment of minorities. Well, you know, it's just part of their larger thing. And China, I guess I could talk about that for a little bit. China in the last week and a half has basically started pushing a whole new scheme of crackdowns against independent thought inside of China. I am becoming more and more convinced that Jack Ma, the guy that is the owner and CEO of Alibaba, has either been disappeared or is under some sort of house arrest or in jail being beaten. It was announced at the end of last week that Alibaba would effectively be donating about either a half or 2/3 of its total value to these new redistribution projects that are going on well, the Chinese government says that this is to industrialized, unindustrial areas. But this is like billions and billions and billions of dollars. So they're doing stuff from as small as saying kids that are young can only play 3 hours of video games a night, and all the way up to saying we're going to kidnap this guy. I don't know if they've actually kidnapped him, but it's becoming... We don't know where Jack Ma is, and his company just gave away somewhere between half and 2/3 of their value to the Chinese government. So you can draw inferences on your own. 3 hours a week. It's like 1 hour, 3 days a week, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So it's a mess. All right, so that is enough of me. Let's go raid Jay. James is a cool dude. He does cool art. You should show him some love when we get there. Our battle cry, as always, is adventure. If you could throw some of those lovely adventure hats into the chat as well, that would be amazing. I will see everybody next on Thursday night, 1900 Central Standard Time, and we will talk about the collapse of the Han. The collapse of the Han Empire and the Three Kingdoms of China. And it'll be fun. I really enjoy this time period. I'm thinking about even maybe stretching it into 2, but we'll see. As it is, let's go raid Jay. Hope everybody has a good night. Good to see everybody. Thank you again for the generous nature. Hey, it's Sci-Fi, sorry. We're about to go raid. But yeah, it's good to see you too. Anyway, take it easy, everybody. Have a good one, and I'll see you Thursday.